people who generate ideas in the academy and other places. And then there's a world of people in government, for example, desperately seeking ideas. But those two places do not meet. When you're in government and you're making policy, your day-to-day is so busy that you are working with a blowtorch in your face every day. And in the academy, you're writing for a different purpose and a different audience. So government isn't going to research the ideas, and researchers have a hard time figuring out how to get their ideas over the wall to be used by government. So my background is as a policymaker. I know what I would want and what I was looking for when I needed good ideas. And we were hoping, and the problem that we intend to solve with the translation project is to get great ideas into the hands of policymakers so that they're plug and play. Well, you want things that are going to work. And you also want to be able to walk between the raindrops of right and left. You want to avoid the buzzsaw of partisanship that often distorts what's a good idea and what's not a good idea. And often the best way to get to effective policy is to look at the evidence. Always that's the way. So rigorous research is one thing that does that. But research isn't policy, and policy isn't implementation. And so figuring out how you can loft research into a way that policymakers recognize it and can actually use it is what we're trying to do. I've been a public servant really my entire life. I was a prosecutor. I oversaw state criminal justice agencies. I was the criminal justice advisor to the mayor of the city of New York. And there are big problems that you need to solve. But where are the solutions? It is really hard to find them. And I would have loved it if somebody had handed me a toolkit box filled with good ideas that I could use and that were mapped over my budget and my operations. Because a lot of times what happens is there's a sort of xenophobia in local government, meaning I'm glad that idea worked for you in your town in Houston. That will never work in New York because we're so different. And so showing exactly how an idea can work in your town, specificity, I think, is important to implementation. So I think the first thing is to choose an idea that you want to start with. And we decided that we would choose an idea that not just New York City, but most cities' mayors want to solve, which is gun violence, because gun violence affects everything. It affects school achievement, it affects mortality. It is a major problem. And so there are many ideas that are out there that are not just evidence-based, but are random controlled trial tested, some of which were actually, there were RCTs in New York City itself. So street lighting, random controlled trial in New York City showing that turning on the lights reduces nighttime felony crime by 36%. That is stunning. That's not, in 10 years, that's not, it's, you turn on the lights and that's what happens. So that's the kind of idea that we want to be able to translate. And so what we are doing is almost literally taking the idea and turning it into the kind of language that a deputy mayor or deputy commissioner or an OMB director would actually understand. Just explaining what the idea is in simple, absorbable language. And then secondly, and sort of crucially, to lay that over what are, in this case, New York City's budget and operations look like. Like, what would it actually look like as far as costs go, as far as benefits go, to do that citywide in these 10 neighborhoods, in these places with the highest rates of shootings? And what would be the effect now, in a year, in 5 years, in a generation? So that's sort of the first two parts: select the idea, figure out the budget and operations, and then kind of the $64,000 question is disseminate it and try and inject it into the city's thinking. And that has many component parts to it. So the idea is we're doing this all from the point of view of the policymaker. What will make a policymaker actually look at it? And we're going to be working from public information, so it's not going to be to the decimal point. But we want it to be interesting enough that the policymaker will hand it to the budget director and say, now figure it out to the decimal point so we can decide if we're going to put it in the budget. And so the idea is, let's have essentially one piece of paper, and on one side, very simply and absorbably, what is the idea? Lighting reduces nighttime felony crime by 36%. Flip it over and have the costs and the benefits. Again, not kind of highly hyphenated and hard to absorb, but that any layperson, any government official could understand it well enough to go, you know, this might make sense, that this would work in my budget. And we would then have and back up that people who are trying to figure this out at a higher level of detail could use as a kind of technical appendix. But in the first instance, let's have the document that could be distributed. Yeah, I think that that is the big question, and there are sort of many pieces to this. In the first instance, cities have to even know that these ideas exist. So how do you get these ideas into the drinking water? And that is something that has been a real impediment. No one's reading, you know, the Journal of Criminology and Public Policy if you're, you know, the deputy mayor for criminal justice in a city. No one is going to the MBER conferences on the economics of crime if you're a policymaker. If you're a policymaker, you have no idea what endogenous means or homophily means or any of that. And so there are enormous barriers to even knowing what the idea is. So in the first instance, it's let's socialize the idea, let's get it into the drinking water. And then there are all kinds of ways to try and have the campaign to get it into the budget. Part of that is timing. Make sure that the ideas hit at a time when a city is actually shaping its budget. And part of it has to do with the particular idea in the particular city. Do you sell it wholesale or retail? Is it one-on-one meetings or is it a campaign? So that's what we're working on. So we're going to start in New York City exactly because we think specificity is important. And we'll see how it goes, and we anticipate that we'll learn a ton. And then we have a couple of other cities who are interested in this, but it will require building a team that really knows that city, that politics, that policy. So it's really a democracy building project. That is, how can we get the best results for cities and city dwellers? And there is always the great beast of politics that hangs over everything. But building the reflex among policymakers, and then also building the desire and knowledge among people who live in cities for evidence that actually works, whether it's promoted by the left or the right, is where we want to get to. So, here's an example for you. When crime goes up, particularly gun violence, very often what happens in a city is that elected officials will do gun buybacks because it's such a fantastic picture. A table filled with guns, officials standing behind it, lots of coverage. It looks like you are moving the needle. But study after study after study shows that they're utterly ineffective, because you're not taking the guns from people who are using them in crimes. The people who are selling their guns are usually law-abiding citizens, not people who have used these guns in a murder, an assault, a robbery. So how can we wean politicians from doing that? How can we wean people from demanding a gun buyback? Well, part of it is by getting these ideas into public conversation, into your reflexes as to what is it that you demand when gun violence goes up. And I guess I sort of look for a day when it seems just as reasonable to stand on the courthouse steps and say, turn on the lights, as it is to say, send in the police. We're starting slowly because it's the first time we've done it. We think that anyone has done it. But we hope to build a kind of pipeline that moves in a pretty sprightly way. Obviously, there are a lot of ideas around gun violence that could be put together, and each of these ideas together have a different impact than one of them alone. But we would like to move on to address issues of disorder, of street mental illness, of homelessness, all of these things that are adjacent to crime and safety issues, but are not necessarily that issue specifically, but have to do with improving the life of people who live in cities. Every city government has the opportunity to get the biggest bang from the buck. Every city has a recurring budget, even in times of great financial strain. And budgets are simply policy choices. So why not serve up to governments ways that they can arrange their budget in order to have the most effect on crime and on the quality of life of people in cities? And that has to do not just with police, but with a whole range of civic services that affect the quality of life. And because cities cover the waterfront and have all these networks of health, welfare, and police, of course, and with their budgets, they can be the arterial structure of reform because they're everywhere and they have recurring funds.